Welcome to our Examining the Cyber Threat Landscape in 2022 virtual event. I'm Nyla Boodoo, host and editor of Axios Today, and I'm coming to you from Washington, D.C. Welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course on Axios.com. And you can join the conversation on Twitter with @Axios or hashtag Axios Events. Over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be joined by my colleague Ina Fried, and we'll be examining the current cyber threat landscape. Our first guest is New York Congressman John Katko, joining us from Washington, D.C. Representative, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
First, I just wanted to express my condolences to you all for your neighbors in Buffalo for this weekend's mass shooting that killed 10 New Yorkers, including a former police officer. I didn't want to start without acknowledging that.
Yeah, and it's a solemn thing to do, and I appreciate that. It tears at the very fabric of what we try to prevent every day on Homeland Security, and to know that, the people from a neighboring community and how it all unfolded and why it unfolded is just tragic all the way around. And it's just going to make us redouble our efforts to want to work even harder. So thank you for saying that.
Because you are the ranking member of the House Homeland Security Committee, I did want to ask, because I know in the past your committee has flagged how much these shooters are inspired by social media to commit violent acts. And I'm thinking about how fast that video circulated, even though it was taken down within just, I believe, about 2 minutes. I wonder what you think the government should be doing more to ensure that companies like Meta or Twitch are not glorifying terrorism.
Yeah, there's so much more we can do and so much more we have to do. But this pathetic human who did this crime was inspired by other similar attacks that he'd seen online from other acts in New Zealand, and I believe it was Norway and others. And we've got to get more sophisticated algorithms and more sophisticated vehicles and technology to prevent these individuals from spreading this filth online, especially when the event's going on. I mean, to wear a camera and live stream killing people is something that we've got to do everything we can, use every technology at our disposal to try and prevent. And we're going to endeavor to do that going forward.
I wonder if we can move to the cyber threat that's occupied a lot of people since Russia invaded Ukraine. And maybe we can just start with what you see right now as the biggest cyber threats to America coming from Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Well, I'll take one step back, okay? And over the last several years, it's clear to me that the biggest Homeland Security threat is cyber attacks, and they're just growing exponentially. They were growing exponentially before Russia invaded Ukraine, and it's clear that Russia used their cyber attack capabilities to try and make their incursion into invasion of Ukraine, more successful. So it's an active war with them on this level. They have threatened to do the same with us as far as cyber attacks. We are fully preparing to try and anticipate just such an attack, and there's no doubt in my mind that Russia right now is kind of parrying a bit, kind of examining our networks to see where they can attack if they so choose. But they also understand that there's a very high cost to them if they do so, and we're going to be prepared to do that. But as far as ensuring our networks go, we have to assume that every single person is going to be the next subject of a major attack, and especially critical infrastructure, and we need to prepare our systems accordingly. Homeland Security has done a terrific job with a program called Shields Up at CISA, the Cybersecurity Agency, and we need to do more of the interaction with the private sector to help them harden their systems and be prepared for attack. And once an attack happens, we may not be able to prevent it, but we can certainly prevent it from spreading and becoming more severe if we're prepared on the front end.
I know in the past, I've heard government officials talking about the social contract that needs to be better between systemically important critical infrastructure and organizations like CISA, other government agencies. Do you feel like that has improved in the past couple of months, particularly given the war?
Yes, I think the necessity is the mother of invention. There's some sticky legislation that I'm working on, which is short for systemically important critical infrastructure. And we want to just basically enhance the partnership with the SICI environment, the first thing you got to do is define what is systemically important critical infrastructure. If all critical infrastructure is considered systemically important, then nothing is. We got to take what we believe to be the most important sectors of critical infrastructure and most crucial sectors and give them a higher level of attention and a higher level of protection, and best when we can. Everything from giving them more access to information to us doing everything we can to make sure their systems are as hardened as they can be. And I definitely see an uptick in our the public-private sector interrelationship is growing, it's germinating, and it's the trust level is being built up. And it's I'm very excited about that going forward.
What more needs to happen? What would you like to see happen?
Well, I think we need to define statutorily in legislation what's a criteria for determining what is a systemically important critical infrastructure. We need to get a bill passed. I have one that does just that. Congressman Langerman's got one that is more expansive. We're trying to meet in the middle and work something out, and we're trying to do that right now. And hopefully we can get that done because I think it's really important that we do get it done. And once you define it, then let CISA go to work with the private sector, and once the framework is set to get it done. But I don't think CISA is waiting for us. I think they're already taking some steps, but they could sure use some direction. We sure need to give it to them.
Of course, I know we have all of these short-term threats and crises that you all are working on, but I also don't want to miss discussing the long game here. And I wonder what to your mind are the crucial priorities as you're thinking about Congress's relationship with the White House on cybersecurity?
Well, I think we've done a tremendous amount of good things in that regard. And listen, I'm a big critic of this administration for a lot of the things like the border and inflation, their energy policy, and they deserve to get their knuckles wrapped on those things. But with respect to cybersecurity, they've done a pretty damn good job. They've got good people in good positions. Chris Inglis, as a cyber director, is exactly what we need. I view him as a head coach and have a very good relationship with him in his office. Jen Easterly at CISA, basically being a quarterback of the .gov domain in the civilian domain, very, very important. We have others in the national security side, like Newberger, who are doing a good job. And as long as they all can play well in the sandbox together, I'm really happy with how they're doing. And I give a particular shout out to CISA. CISA has grown by leaps and bounds, and their stature has grown. The respect for CISA has grown, and their effectiveness has grown under her tenure. And the more we can keep her in there and keep giving her the tools she needs to make CISA what it needs to be, the quarterback that it most desperately needs to be, the better off our country as a whole is going to be. And we're going to continue to do that going forward.
Now, your Democratic counterpart, Representative Jing Langevin, has announced his retirement, as have you. Who do you see taking the reins in Congress on cyber issues when you all are gone?
Listen, I don't think anyone would have thought a few years ago that I was going to be so proficient with cyber issues. I mean, necessity, again, is a mother of invention here, to use the phrase again. And I'm confident that others can fill the void for us. And I think what's important for Jim and for myself is to make sure that we leave the program in as strong a shape as possible. And we're doing just that. We're both running through the tape. We're not like blowing off this work. We're working very hard. We'll be working very hard well into November and probably December on cyber issues. And I think whoever comes in after us is simply going to have to pick up the mantle and continue to run with it. And I'm quite certain, based on the infrastructure that we're going to leave them, that they'll be okay.
What advice do you have for who takes your place?
Take it serious, because the threats to this country are extraordinarily serious in the cyber realm. And you have to understand that if you're given the responsibility to oversee this cybersecurity topic within Homeland Security, you darn well better take it serious, and you darn well better make it your highest priority. And I think they will.
And now you all have really laid the groundwork in a lot of ways. And at this point, I don't know if you would agree that you're sort of in a phase of implementation. Given that, what do you see as the biggest challenges for this next phase of ensuring that we have appropriate cybersecurity in this country?
Well, I think continuing to fund CISA, continuing to recognize the threat that cybersecurity is, continuing to encourage all aspects of the cyber world to work well together, be it the DNI, be it the cyber director, be it CISA, and all the agencies within them. encouraging the CISOs at all the agencies and in the private sector to understand the gravity of the threat here, and just keep the ball rolling in the right direction. I really do think we have the ball rolling in the right direction, and I think it just keep providing the ability to give the momentum, give it more momentum. You can do that by getting the hell out of the way once you get the things done you need to do, like the funding issues and the statutory things they need done. Like, for example, I do think we need to have a 5-year term for the cyber director at CISA, Jen Easterly, because she needs to be able to know she can settle into the job for the long term. We did that with the TSA director, and it's really helped turn TSA around. And we need to do the same thing with CISA. But I think really just encouraging the momentum to continue. And I'm going to stay involved in cyber issues well after my time is done in Congress, because I really believe this being the biggest threat that it is, we have to do that.
Congressman John Katko, thank you for your time.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
And next we have a View from the Top segment with Chris Freites.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Freites, and I want to thank our sponsor, Google, for making this conversation possible. And joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Google's Director of Data Governance, Government Affairs, and Public Policy, Kate Charlotte. Kate, welcome to Axios.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with the war in Ukraine. It has brought to the forefront the critical importance of cybersecurity and the role it plays in modern conflict. Just recently, 10 governments publicly attributed cyber attacks on Ukraine to Russia. So how is Google responding to the increased cybersecurity activity in Ukraine and the surrounding region?
It's a really important question, and our teams have worked 24/7 to support the people of Ukraine and the broader region. That support comes in several forms. We're aiding the humanitarian effort. We're helping people find high quality, reliable information so they can locate resources they need, so they can communicate with their loved ones. And as you note, an important piece of that effort is defending against cybersecurity threats. So we have a team called TAG. It's the Threat Analysis Group that tracks and counters serious threat actors. Their research has tracked active threat campaigns in relation to the war in Ukraine. And when we see those campaigns, we work to disrupt them. We warn people so they can take extra steps to protect themselves. Sometimes that's through using our advanced protection program, which is our highest level of account security, which we know hundreds of people in Ukraine are using today. We've seen that distributed denial of service attacks are on the rise in relation to Ukraine. So we're also scaling up our Project Shield program, extending it to governments in need. And at the moment, we're helping protect the websites of more than 200 key organizations in Ukraine. Now, I will say Russia-backed hacking isn't new to us. We've been taking action in this space for years. We'll continue that. We'll continue protecting our users. And that also means collaborating with governments around the world who are working hard to protect against threats.
Now, outside of cyber warfare, I think we've all noticed that cyber attacks and data breaches are on the rise. How does Google view its role in protecting the digital ecosystem?
Yeah, as you can imagine, security is the cornerstone of Google's product strategy. It's how we keep more people safe online than anyone else in the world. We all have such full lives. People shouldn't have to spend mental energy worrying about whether they have the latest security. They should just experience it through products that have top security already built in by default. It's so powerful when you make it easy. And that's why we automatically turn on certain security measures for users. I'm really proud that we're the first consumer tech company to start turning on two-step verification by default. This is a capability that dramatically reduces the success of attacks, and we can continue building on it with other capabilities like built-in security keys right into your phone. It is a team sport, which is why we partner all the time across industry. We did this recently with the FIDO Alliance, Apple, and Microsoft, with some great advancements in passwordless sign-ins. And you can imagine a world without passwords. We've been working on it for more than 10 years, and we're all really, really excited for that day. I guess I just would say, lastly, that we work hard to keep our users safe, but we also drive technical solutions to improve internet security overall. 10 years ago, less than half of web traffic was encrypted, which made it vulnerable to eavesdroppers. Google worked with other browsers to drive transformation internet-wide. And now you see that little lock icon in your browser search bar, which means your traffic is protected where you go.
So what's Google's advice for governments, organizations, companies? How should they prioritize their cybersecurity?
Yeah, we're in a moment where all governments and businesses have a chance to reshape their thinking. Sometimes there's this temptation to get distracted by shiny objects. I've long been a believer in focusing on fundamentals. And you've got to have a defensible architecture. That's why you hear so much about zero trust. You've got to have secure software development lifecycle, thinking about security throughout. You got to break away from undefendable legacy systems and practices, and focusing on fundamentals like this is the best chance to get out of this cycle of vulnerability patch. But obviously that takes focus and investment from government and the private sector.
But it's not just companies and governments who need to protect themselves, right? Like we all do. And that was pretty clear when Google recently announced a host of privacy and security updates, along with some new product features to help keep users safe. But what are the challenges that we all face protecting our digital lives? And what should we be thinking as we go about our digital day, Kate?
Yeah, more than 80% of Americans are concerned about the safety and privacy of their online data. I find that a striking statistic, and people's expectations for privacy and security are rising, and that's as it should be. So we want to make sure when people use Google products, they're safe as possible, that it's easy to protect yourself. And that's why Secure by Default was an important theme this week at our I/O conference. Among other things, we announced account safety status, which will be an alert on your profile picture if a security issue needs attention. We expanded phishing protections from Gmail to now to docs, sheets, and slides. But it all takes education. It takes helping people on that journey. So we've been working to promote online safety education, including for families. Yeah, the truth is cyber threats have become a key part of our lives, which means these kinds of online safety practices need to become second nature.
So Kate, we have just about a minute left. Quickly, what's the one thing that people could do that would really benefit their cybersecurity?
Great question. So I would encourage everyone to take a security checkup to ensure the security of your accounts. You can go onto Google. It's a step-by-step process. You'll be prompted to enable two-step verification, which is one of the most important things you can do to protect your account. It'll give you insights into what devices are signed in to your account. It will give you the option to prepare your account for recovery by offering a backup phone number. And yeah, securing your Google accounts, really important thing you can do.
Kate Charlotte of Google, thank you so much for joining Axios.
Thank you.
And now over to Ina Fried.
I'm Ina Fried, Axios' Chief Technology Correspondent. Our final guest is the Executive Director of the Cyber Project at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center, Lauren Zabierek, joining us from Boston, Massachusetts. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, Ina. Thanks for having me.
So some people say they expected more from Russia when it came to cyber attacks related to the Ukraine conflict. That's not the way you look at it. How do you see things?
That's correct. I think there was a really big sort of outcry or, kind of throwing people, throwing your hands up in the air and say, hey, I thought we expected more. Is this cyber war, et cetera? And I really want to emphasize that maybe we haven't seen these big, huge, catastrophic cyber attacks that maybe people predicted, but that space in between what we have been seeing is still really, really bad, right? There's still a lot of impacts on everyday people. And that is, that can be really devastating, right? The loss of internet, the loss of communications, not being able to access your assets or information, especially, in such a dangerous time is very bad for civilians.
And we did see some sort of strategic or targeted things like hacking Viasat, which we now, I believe, is being attributed to Russia. But Russia is just one of the threats that's out there. Talk about the landscape. What has you most concerned as you look at the current threat landscape when it comes to cyber attacks?
You're right. The cyber threat landscape is vast and it's constantly growing. So yes, we have threats from Russia, who is a very credible, very capable adversary in this domain, right? We just had the recent discovery of 2 new malware families targeted at industrial control systems. So that really demonstrates that both the capability and the intent there. But there are also other nation states to be worried about. For instance, China, which the FBI director, Christopher Wray, he has talking about, a lot in recent remarks from the perspective of cyber-enabled IP theft, espionage, stealing data, and things like that. But there's also, other nation states to be wary of, Iran, North Korea, et cetera. But then also we have to worry about the cyber criminals getting into the game. And more, these actors are able to get in because these services are a lot more specialized, right? People advertise and rent out infrastructure or sell their services on different forums in the dark web, and so that barrier to entry is a lot lower. So the field kind of keeps getting bigger. More entrants are coming in, and more capabilities are developing.
And when you say services, you're not talking about the internet services that they attack. You're talking about the services needed to take on an attack, that basically you can buy what you need to do a cyber attack. And it seems like the line between nation state attacks and ransomware is also blurring.
Exactly, you're right. So and on the services that we're talking about, right? So infrastructure as a service, for instance, or malware as a service. So these things that maybe a group can't necessarily produce on their own, they can actually rent it or purchase it on the dark web or other forums. But you're right, these capabilities are increasing. And so there can be sort of this blurring, I guess you can say, and transfer of capabilities, especially in nations that don't necessarily, we'll just say, outright ban ransomware groups and cyber criminals from operating. There could be this transfer of technology and capabilities. And so we saw something like that with the Colonial Pipeline attack that happened about a year ago, right? We had some very capable actors within a ransomware group, a cyber criminal group, targeting critical infrastructure, and that really had impacts for a lot of people across the United States. The delivery of gas, for instance, was halted for several days, and that has a real impact upon people.
And those capabilities, you mentioned it a couple times, this idea of industrial controls being attacked. I mean, that's sort of the big fears that have been out there for a long time in terms of, could someone attack the electrical grid or the water supply? We haven't necessarily seen that to a large scale, but the threat is there. And am I right that a lot of the deterrence right now is the impact of that, and that would be seen as an act of war, not so much that it's not within the technical capabilities of some countries?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you say that. DNI Avril Haines just recently said that Russia has had these longstanding concerns about escalation, especially in the cyber domain, with the United States. And so while we're always sort of worried about that threat, and for good reason. We have seen this evolution in capabilities, and I think that intent has increased again over the last couple of years, especially with the conflict in Ukraine right now. And so, yeah, it's anything that would take down these services would be very bad for civilians. And so this determination of whether, it is an active war in cyberspace, that's a very political determination, right? The head of a nation, our president has to make that determination. But even if that determination was made or not, it's still, if you are impacting essential services, if you're impacting public safety, that is very bad for Americans, and we need to make it less bad.
Now, I've heard some people, ranging from Microsoft's President Brad Smith to some of the folks at the Israeli NSO group, talk about the need for a cyber Geneva Convention, something that says this is what's acceptable and this is what isn't. Now, it's a little strange to be talking about an acceptable cyber attack and an unacceptable one, in the idea that, you know, any hacking or cyber attack isn't acceptable. But with war, war is bad in general, but we still have rules of war. Do we need something akin to a cyber Geneva Convention?
I think it's an interesting question, right? The concept of the cyber Geneva Convention is really to protect civilians in times of peace, because we've seen all of these cyber operations happening, and many of them against civilians or civilian infrastructure in these times of peace. It's not necessarily warfare. And it is related to this concept of, is this cyber war, is this not, this political determination and the space in between. Because again, when we impact civilians, so whether it was for instance, NotPetya, right, taking, affecting shipping or the drug delivery and things like that, or WannaCry, for instance, impacting the National Institute of Health and in hospitals in England. These are things that impact civilians, and we haven't necessarily, had any sort of declarations of war. So I think having this agreement in place helps us sort of go beyond norms, right? That countries have notionally agreed to, whether through the UN group of governmental experts or the UN open-ended working group, that we won't target things like critical infrastructure, but we still have seen. So how can we protect civilians even further, than what those norms might actually give us?
And we've talked a lot about the attacks that are out there, but obviously one of the big things you do in cyber security is a lot of defense. And it seems like one of the things that's hampering that effort is just a lack of qualified, talented people. How significant is the shortage of experts in cybersecurity?
It's very significant. And I think there's shortages everywhere in many different industries, but especially in cybersecurity. We often reference this heat map from cyberseek.org, and right now it's hovering at about 600,000 open jobs. But it's not just this point in time that we have to be worried about, especially as the landscape continues to to develop, to worsen, et cetera. But we also have to look towards the future, right? So what is the pipeline, and how are we giving our young people training and education and resources to make sure that we do have the talent to go forward? And we have to look at things like, do we need degrees in order to do cybersecurity? What kind of training? How can we get training at lower costs and get people the experience to actually get into the industry? Because there's a lot of talent out there, there's a lot of interest, but that there's a disconnect there that's preventing many people from actually entering the field.
Well, obviously a lot to talk and think about. Thank you so much, Lauren Zabierek, for joining Axios.
Thank you, Ina. So good to be here today.
Well, thank you all for joining us for hopefully another virtual conversation that's made us all a little bit smarter, faster. For the latest on cyber threats, you can sign up for Axios Login, our daily tech newsletter, at axios.com/newsletters or in the Axios app. And thank you all for joining, and we'll see you on axios.com.